In the busy town of Mbale, Zawadi stepped into her new life as a bride with a heart full of dreams. She believed marriage would bring her happiness, love, and a family she could call her own. From the very first day, she tried her best to win their hearts. She woke up early to cook for everyone, cleaned the house until it shone, and carried herself with a smile even when she was tired. Every small act of kindness came from the hope that one day they would see her as a daughter, not just an outsider. But the walls of that house carried a different story. Behind closed doors, whispers turned into cruel words. Her mother-in-law would shake her head and call her a burden, while her sisters-in-law mocked her simple clothes and humble ways. Even when she tried to laugh with them or share a gentle word, they pushed her aside as if she didn't belong. At night, she would lie awake, wondering what she had done wrong, asking herself if love was not enough to earn a place in their hearts. Her husband, Malik, was the only one she hoped would stand by her, but even he grew distant. Whenever she looked at him with teary eyes, he turned away, pretending not to see her pain. Yet Zawadi did not give up. She told herself that patience could change hearts, and love could soften even the coldest souls. With this fragile hope, she stayed strong, not knowing what cruel plans awaited her. Every morning in the Mbale household began with Zawadi's quiet footsteps. She would rise before the sun, sweep the compound, and prepare breakfast with love, hoping that maybe today her efforts would be noticed. But instead of appreciation, she was met with cold stares and sharp whispers. Her mother-in-law seemed to carry bitterness in her heart, and every day she found a way to crush Zawadi's spirit. With a cruel smile, she would lean close and whisper, "You will never be enough for my son." Those words stung more than any wound. They followed Zawadi like a shadow, reminding her that no matter what she did, she was unwanted. Her sisters-in-law were no kinder. They often gathered together, laughing loudly, pointing at her simple clothes and plain jewelry. "Look at her," they would say. "She looks like a maid, not a wife for our brother." Their laughter echoed in her ears long after they walked away. Zawadi would quietly lower her head, hiding her tears, pretending she didn't hear. She tried to tell herself that silence was stronger than answering back, but inside her heart was breaking piece by piece. The hardest pain came from Malik, the man she had chosen with love. Instead of standing beside her, he chose the comfort of his family's side. Whenever Zawadi tried to tell him about the hurtful words or the endless mockery, Malik would frown and say, "Don't make trouble, Zawadi. Respect my family." His coldness left her feeling completely alone, as if her marriage was only a cage without a key. But while her in-laws mocked her inside the house, the world outside began to see her true worth. Neighbors often praised her gentle heart. They admired how respectful she was, how she greeted everyone kindly, and how she never raised her voice even when insulted. Children in the neighborhood loved her too, running to her with laughter because she always found time to listen to their stories. Her goodness shone naturally like light breaking through clouds. This praise, however, became another weapon against her. Her in-laws grew jealous, their hatred burning hotter each time someone said, "Zawadi is such a blessing. Malik is lucky to have her." Instead of softening their hearts, jealousy poisoned them even more. The mother-in-law's whispers grew sharper, the sisters-in-law's laughter became crueler, and Malik's distance turned into cold silence. Every night, Zawadi cried quietly on her thin mattress, careful not to let anyone hear. She prayed that one day her patience would bear fruit, that love would finally win. But deep down, she could feel the seed of hatred growing stronger around her, as if the walls of the house themselves were closing in. She was a young bride with so much love to give, yet trapped in a family that only wanted to see her fall. Still, she held on to hope, not knowing that the storm ahead would test her strength in ways she never imagined. The morning sun rose over Mbale, painting the sky with gold, but inside Malik's family home, a different plan was unfolding. Zawadi, as usual, woke early and swept the compound, her heart still carrying a fragile hope that one day she would be accepted. She hummed softly to herself, unaware that her in-laws were busy with something she knew nothing about. In hushed voices, they gathered their bags, filled baskets with food, and tied bundles of clothes, preparing for a family trip to the mountains. The air was filled with laughter and excitement, but none of it included her. Zawadi noticed the unusual noise in the house, the hurried footsteps, and the smell of roasted meat being packed. Curious, she asked one of her sisters-in-law, "Are we expecting visitors?" The girl smirked and turned away without answering. When Zawadi tried again, another snapped, "Mind your own business." Their cold replies stung, but she stayed quiet, convincing herself that maybe they would soon call her to join. But their plan was crueler than her gentle heart could ever imagine. Just before leaving, her mother-in-law looked around with sharp eyes and whispered to the others, "Don't let her follow us. Today she will learn her place." They nodded in agreement. While Zawadi was busy folding clothes in her small corner, someone quietly slid the bolts on the door. The sound of the heavy lock clicking shut echoed like thunder in her ears. She rushed to the door, pulled at it and called out, "Is anyone there?" But by then, the family was already stepping outside, their voices full of laughter, their feet moving farther and farther away. Through the window, she saw them climbing into the cart, carrying baskets full of food and water. They didn't even look back. Her mother-in-law's voice floated in the air like poison. "Maybe hunger will teach her she's unwanted." The words pierced Zawadi's heart deeper than any knife. She banged on the door, calling out for Malik, hoping her husband would come back for her. "Malik, please don't leave me here." But he didn't answer. He sat beside his mother, his eyes turned away, as if he had erased her from his world. The cart rolled down the dusty road, carrying them all to the mountains, leaving Zawadi behind like a prisoner in her own home. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Zawadi leaned against the locked door, her heart racing. Her hands trembled as she realized there was no food, no water, nothing to keep her alive if they stayed gone for long. Fear crawled through her veins. How could the people she served with love choose such cruelty? As the sun climbed higher, the house grew hotter. Her throat was already dry, and the emptiness of her stomach gnawed at her. Alone in that locked house, Zawadi's hope began to shiver, but deep inside, a quiet strength whispered to her that this would not be the end. The cruel plan had begun, but her story was far from over. The house was silent, too silent for Zawadi's restless heart. She sat on the cold floor, her eyes fixed on the heavy wooden door that had been locked against her. Hours felt like days as hunger twisted inside her stomach and thirst burned her throat like fire. She pressed her hand against her belly, hoping the pain would ease, but it only grew sharper with time. Each corner of the house that once echoed with her footsteps now felt like a prison cell. First she called out. She knocked on the door with weak fists, shouting Malik's name, shouting for anyone who might pass by. But no one came. The neighbors lived far apart, and her cries were swallowed by the thick silence of the compound. Tears rolled down her cheeks, warm at first, then cold against her skin as she realized no one was listening. When night came, fear grew even stronger. The house that was once noisy with voices now felt haunted. Every creak of wood, every rustle of the wind outside made her heart jump. Darkness filled the room like a shadow that refused to leave. She curled herself into a corner, hugging her knees tightly, whispering prayers into the night. "God, please don't let me die here. Please give me strength." The thirst was the hardest. By the second day, her lips cracked, her throat dry as dust. She licked them again and again, but there was no relief. She searched every corner of the room, hoping to find even a drop of water, but there was nothing. Hunger clawed at her body, but thirst made her dizzy, her head heavy as if the world was spinning around her. Memories filled her mind in those moments of weakness. She thought of her father's gentle smile, of the days she played in the fields as a child, free and happy. She remembered the dreams she carried when she married Malik, the belief that she was stepping into a home of love. Those dreams now lay broken, yet in her heart, a small spark of strength refused to die. By the third night, her body was weak, but her spirit fought back. She told herself over and over, "I am not a burden. I am not what they call me. I have worth." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it gave her courage. Even as her body trembled from weakness, she lifted her head toward the darkness, promising herself that if she ever walked free again, she would never let anyone break her. The days of darkness were cruel, each hour stretching like a lifetime. Yet inside that locked house, something powerful was being born. Zawadi's body suffered, but her soul was learning to rise. Her in-laws wanted her to break, but they didn't know that in those silent nights, they were creating a woman stronger than they had ever imagined. The third day dragged on painfully for Zawadi. Her lips were dry and bleeding, her voice weak from calling out for help. She could barely lift her head, yet she gathered all her strength and tapped faintly against the wooden door. Each knock was softer than the last, but it carried the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would hear. Her vision blurred, and her body trembled with weakness, but she refused to let go completely. Across the dusty path, a little girl was playing outside her grandmother's hut. She paused when she thought she heard a strange sound, like a soft tapping carried by the wind. She tilted her head, listening carefully. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but the sound came again, faint and uneven. Curious, she ran to her grandmother and tugged her wrapper. "Grandmother," she said, "someone is knocking from inside Malik's house." The old woman frowned. "That house is empty. The family traveled to the mountains." But the child insisted, pulling her grandmother's hand. "No, Nana. Heard it. Someone is there." Together, they walked toward the locked house. The old woman pressed her ear against the wooden door, and her heart sank when she heard the faintest sound, a weak knock, followed by a low, broken cry. She pushed at the door, but the heavy lock held tight. "Who is inside?" she called out. For a moment silence answered. Then came a faint whisper, so weak it was almost lost in the air. "Help me, please." The old woman's eyes filled with tears as recognition struck her. "It's Zawadi," she cried. Without wasting a moment, she called for help. Neighbors rushed over with tools, and together they broke the lock. When the door finally creaked open, the sight before them broke every heart. Zawadi lay on the floor, half-conscious, her body thin and weak, her face pale. She looked like a shadow of the bright young bride who had once entered the home with hope. The old woman knelt beside her, lifting her head gently onto her lap. "Oh, my child," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What have they done to you?" Tears rolled freely down her wrinkled cheeks as she brushed the dust from Zawadi's face. The neighbors stood in shock, some gasping, others shaking their heads in anger. "How could they do this?" one muttered. Another said, "No woman deserves such cruelty." Slowly, carefully, the old woman and the neighbors carried Zawadi out into the fresh air. She tried to open her eyes, blinking at the sunlight, but her body was too weak. Still, a faint breath escaped her lips, as if the light had given her a small piece of hope back. They brought her to the old woman's home, laying her on a soft mat. The grandmother wept as she gave her water, spoon by spoon, and Zawadi drank as though every drop was life itself. Around her, the neighbors murmured with pity and outrage. Word spread quickly, and soon the entire village knew what had happened. Zawadi was safe at last, rescued by the kindness of a child's ears and a grandmother's brave heart. Her body was broken, but her spirit had been saved. This moment marked not the end of her suffering, but the beginning of a story that would soon shake the entire village. Days turned into weeks as Zawadi slowly regained her strength in the old woman's hut. Each morning she was given warm porridge and clean water, and each night, the grandmother sat by her side, speaking gently to her as if she were her own daughter. The kindness healed not only Zawadi's body but also the wounds in her heart. For the first time in a long while she felt safe. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange, the grandmother sat quietly, her eyes fixed on Zawadi. After a long silence, she sighed deeply and said, "My child, there is something you must know about your family. Your father, he did not leave you empty-handed." Zawadi's eyes widened in surprise. She had always believed that when her father died, he left nothing behind except memories of his love. "What do you mean, Nana?" she asked softly. The old woman leaned closer, her voice low but steady. "Before your father passed, he came to me with a secret. He told me that he had land and gold hidden in Kisumu. He wanted to protect it until you were old enough to understand its value. He feared greedy hands might snatch it from you, so he trusted me with the truth." Tears filled Zawadi's eyes. The memory of her father's smile came rushing back, and for the first time, she felt his presence again. "He left something for me. He remembered me even in his last days, she whispered, her voice breaking. Yes, child, the grandmother replied, taking her hand. You are not poor, and you are not a burden. Your father left you a legacy. Now it is time to claim what is yours. With the grandmother's guidance and the support of kind neighbors, Zawadi made the journey to Kisumu. The city was bustling with traders, markets, and voices from every corner of life. She had never felt so small, yet inside her, courage grew stronger. Together, they found the lawyer her father had entrusted with documents. When the papers were opened, the truth shone brighter than gold itself. Zawadi was the rightful owner of wide, fertile land and chests of gold that her father had hidden away for her future. For a moment, Zawadi couldn't breathe. She pressed her hands to her mouth, tears flowing freely. From a forgotten bride locked away to a woman standing in a grand office with wealth and power in her name, her life had changed in a heartbeat. The neighbors who stood beside her smiled proudly. The old grandmother held her hand tightly, whispering, "This is who you are meant to be, strong, respected, free." With her inheritance, Zawadi no longer had to bow before cruelty. She was no longer the helpless girl trapped behind locked doors. She walked through Kisumu's streets dressed with dignity, her head held high, admired by strangers who saw her strength. The woman her in-laws had once called a burden was now a name that would be spoken with respect and awe. Zawadi had transformed, not only into a wealthy woman but into a symbol of hope and survival. Weeks later, Malik and his family returned from their long trip to the mountains. Their cart rattled down the dusty road, filled with baskets of dried meat, fruit, and souvenirs. They laughed loudly, sharing stories of waterfalls and cool breezes, proud of their happy time together. None of them mentioned Zawadi. In their minds, she was gone, forgotten, erased like she never belonged. As they reached the compound, Malik's mother unlocked the gate with her usual pride. She walked to the front door, still laughing, and turned the key. But when the wooden door creaked open, her laughter stopped. The room was empty. The mat on the floor was folded, the pots neatly stacked, and there was no trace of Zawadi. For a moment, silence filled the air like a heavy cloud. The sisters-in-law glanced at each other nervously. Maybe she ran away, one whispered. Malik's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. His heart pounded as he searched the house, opening every corner, every room, hoping to find her weak and broken. But there was nothing, only emptiness. Panic began to creep into their voices. Where could she go? We locked her inside, Malik's mother hissed. Her hands shook as she tried to understand how the plan had failed. The family had expected to return to a frightened, starving Zawadi, someone they could mock again. Instead, she had vanished like smoke. It wasn't long before whispers began to spread through the village. At the market, women spoke quietly as they sold vegetables. "Have you heard? Zawadi is alive. She was seen in Kisumu." Men sitting under the acacia tree nodded in agreement. Not just alive, she looked different, dressed in fine clothes, walking with grace. People bowed their heads when she passed. The sisters-in-law overheard these whispers, their faces turning pale. Each rumor painted Zawadi not as a victim, but as a woman rising from the ashes. Children repeated stories too, saying, "She smiled like a queen, and everyone respected her." By the time the news reached Malik's home, the family could hardly breathe from shame. Neighbors came to their gate, some pretending to greet them politely, but their eyes were sharp with judgment. Malik's mother closed the door quickly, afraid of the looks. Inside she raged, pacing back and forth. How can this be? She was supposed to disappear. Now she has turned into something greater than us. Malik sat quietly, his hands trembling. He remembered the last moment he saw her, her face at the door, begging him not to leave. He had turned away, ashamed of her. Yet now she stood taller than him in the eyes of the world. His heart was heavy, filled with a guilt he could not speak aloud. The silence in the house grew heavier than ever. Their laughter from the trip had died. The walls that once held their cruel whispers now echoed with fear and shame. Outside, the village waited for the day Zawadi would return, and everyone knew that when she did, the truth would no longer be hidden. The annual harvest festival was the most celebrated time in Bale. Bright cloths decorated the streets, drums echoed through the air, and the smell of roasted maize filled the marketplace. Families gathered to dance, sing, and thank God for the season's blessings. Malik's family dressed in their finest clothes, determined to show the village their pride. They walked proudly into the festival ground, laughing loudly as if nothing had happened. But that year, the festival was destined to be different. Just as the music grew louder and people began to cheer, a hush suddenly fell across the crowd. All eyes turned toward the entrance. A carriage covered in colorful fabrics stopped at the edge of the festival, and out stepped a woman glowing with dignity and beauty. 'Twas Zawadi. She was dressed in fine fabrics of deep blue and gold, her head wrapped elegantly, her jewelry shining in the sun. Children ran to her side with excitement, and men and women bowed their heads in respect. Whispers filled the air like fire spreading quickly. "That's Zawadi," someone gasped. "She's alive," another voice added. "Not just alive, she is greater than ever." Zawadi walked calmly through the crowd, every step graceful and full of quiet power. The same villagers who once pitied her now admired her, reaching out to greet her. Women touched her hands with tears in their eyes. Children smiled up at her, and the elders nodded with deep respect. The drums softened as if even the music bowed to her presence. At the center of the festival, Malik and his family froze. Their laughter died instantly, replaced by shock and fear. Malik's mother gripped her wrapper tightly, her eyes wide. The sisters-in-law clutched each other's arms, trembling as the truth of their cruelty stood before them in flesh and glory. Malik himself lowered his head, unable to meet his wife's eyes. Zawadi stood tall, her gaze steady as she looked around the festival ground. She did not rush toward her in-laws nor raise her voice. Instead, her silence spoke louder than words. The people around her began to murmur, retelling the story of how she had been locked inside, left to starve and yet survived. Each whisper grew louder until the whole festival buzzed with truth. She was locked away like an animal. They left her to die. But look at her now. God has lifted her higher than all of them. The shame on her in-laws' faces was clear for everyone to see. No excuse could hide their cruelty. No smile could cover their guilt. The same village that once believed their lies now turned against them. Zawadi, however, carried no anger on her face. She simply lifted her chin, letting her presence alone reveal their wickedness. The crowd's admiration wrapped around her like a crown, while her in-laws sank lower and lower in disgrace. That harvest festival would never be forgotten. It was the day truth walked proudly into the heart of Mbale, dressed in gold and dignity, while lies and cruelty stood trembling, exposed before the whole town. The festival ground grew silent as Zawadi stepped forward. The drums stopped, the laughter faded, and every pair of eyes in Bale turned to her. She stood tall in her golden wrap, her face calm but her heart beating strong. For a moment no one spoke. Then, in a voice that was steady and clear, she began to tell her story. "I was a bride who entered her husband's home with love and hope," she said, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. "I cooked, I cleaned, I served with joy, believing I would one day be accepted as family. But instead I was mocked, insulted, and called a burden." Gasps rose from the villagers, but she did not pause. Her voice grew heavier with emotion as she went on. "One morning while they prepared for a trip, they locked me inside the house. No food, no water, no way out. They left me to starve, to die alone like an animal." The crowd erupted in shock. Mothers covered their mouths. Elders shook their heads in disbelief, and children clung to their parents. Zawadi raised her hand, and silence returned. Her eyes, bright with unshed tears, turned toward her in-laws who stood frozen, their faces pale. "It was not God who saved me," she continued softly, "but a child who heard my weak knocks and her grandmother who broke the lock. Without them, I would not be standing here today." Her voice broke for a moment, but she lifted her chin proudly. "And yet, despite the cruelty I faced, I survived. Not because of them, but in spite of them." The chief of Mbale, a tall man with stern eyes, stepped forward. His voice carried authority as he looked at Malik's family. "Is this true?" Did you lock her away to die? Malik's mother trembled, her lips parting, but no words came. The sisters-in-law clung to each other, their eyes filled with shame. All around them, the villagers muttered angrily, "Cruel people! How could they do this? No family should treat a woman like that." Finally, all eyes turned to Malik. He stood stiff, his shoulders heavy, his face pale. He tried to speak, but his lips only trembled. Then, slowly, his head dropped low, his silence louder than any confession. Everyone knew the truth. The chief's face hardened. "You have brought disgrace not only on yourselves, but on our entire community. A wife is not a slave, and a bride is not a burden. You wish to bury her, but today she stands taller than all of you." The villagers erupted in support of Zawadi, clapping, cheering, and calling her name. Tears filled her eyes, but she stood steady, her dignity unshaken. Her in-laws could not raise their heads. Their plan had been exposed before all, their cruelty laid bare in the heart of the festival. That day, justice was not written on paper or spoken in secret, it was carved into the memory of every person who stood in the square. Zawadi's truth had set her free, and her in-laws' silence had condemned them forever. When the festival ended and the truth was laid bare, many expected Zawadi to take revenge. She had the wealth, the respect, and the power to destroy her in-laws with just a word. But Zawadi's heart was different. She had suffered cruelty, yes, but she had also learned the value of mercy. Instead of wasting her strength on hatred, she decided to use her new life for something greater. In Kisumu and Mbale, she began to build schools for children who had no chance to learn. She built homes for widows and orphans, giving them safety and dignity. Her inheritance became a blessing not just for herself but for countless people who once struggled in silence. Everywhere she went, people welcomed her with open arms, calling her a woman of courage and a mother to the poor. Her in-laws, on the other hand, were left to live with the heavy weight of their shame. The same people who once laughed at Zawadi now turned away from Malik's family in disgust. Neighbors whispered about their cruelty, and no festival or smile could erase the stain of their actions. Malik himself lived with a heart full of regret, knowing he had lost not only his wife but also his honor. Zawadi rose above it all. She walked with her head high, her name carried with respect across towns and villages. She was no longer the forgotten bride locked behind doors. She had become a symbol of strength, dignity, and survival. Her story spread far and wide, reminding everyone that even in the face of cruelty, kindness could build an empire, and patience could turn pain into power. It was truly the beginning of a new life, brighter than anything she had ever dreamed.